record as well.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar today. We're just going to give it a minute for people to join and then we'll get started. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're just going to give it a couple of seconds to give people a chance to join and then we'll get started. Hey, thanks everyone for joining the Earthraise Fundamentals of Fundraising webinar today. I'm Sahil. I am the Key Partnerships Manager at Big Give, and delivering the webinar today we have Nick Day. So just before we begin, I'm just going to go over some quick housekeeping and then I'll hand over to Nick. So you may see on the right-hand side of your Zoom panel a chat box. Please set that chat reply to everyone so everyone can see what you're saying. You can introduce yourselves here, your name, organization, share any ideas. And if you have any tech issues, please post them in the chat box and I will get to them as soon as you can raise them. If you do have any questions for the Q&A portion of the webinar, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom panel. You'll see a Q&A button. Please click on that. A box should pop open and you can type in your question. Please avoid putting your questions in the chat box, just because sometimes it can get lost in there. And then if anyone has any accessibility needs, there is the caption button, the transcription service. So I think you may have to click on the three dots if you can't see at the bottom of your Zoom panel and then click on the transcription button, and then that should be enabled for you. And a reminder that we are recording this webinar, so we will be posting it on our YouTube channel in the next few days. So if you do want to rewatch it or share it with colleagues, that will be possible. Just visit our YouTube channel and it will be there in the next few days. And then if you have any questions for after the webinar, a reminder that we do have an FAQs page on our website, so you can all first go there, see if your question may be answered there. But if it isn't, you can always contact us at hellobiggive.org and we'll be happy to support you. With the housekeeping done, I will just stop sharing and hand over to Nick.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today, and thanks to Sahil for inviting me to spend an hour or so with you. I'm Nick Day. I've worked in the sector providing consultancy and training services in the sector for about 25, 26 years now, something like that. So I work with a whole range of different not-for-profit organisations, from some of the biggest household names to some of the smallest, and I run regular training program, public sector, or sorry, publicly available courses, and a range of in-house courses as well. So if you did want to discuss any training opportunities, please contact Sahil, and we see there's ways that we can help you. But I'm going to crack on. Time is short. I've got a lot to get through, and yeah, just from the perspective. Sorry, the screen might just go a little bit funny for a minute, but hopefully you can see the starting screen there. I'm sure Sahil will alert me if anything goes awry. But yeah, I just thought I wanted to share a bit of some thoughts and ideas with running to a successful campaign for you. So. Oh, apologies. It's the arts for Earth Race. Sorry, my apologies. So what we're going to cover is I'm going to talk for about sort of 40, 45 minutes or so. And we're going to have a look at these six things, really, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. So, in terms of the six areas that I want to cover, we're going to look at developing a workable plan. So, getting to grips with some of the key planning steps. Then we're going to get into that, probably the most important part of the whole program today, which is understanding your audiences, how to apply data and insight to define and refine those audiences. Then we're going to get into defining your goals. And I think this is often one of the most challenging areas because quite often what I see, I mean, I work for a range of organizations, both large and small. And one of the things that's really quite surprising is this area of setting clear objectives and outcomes from campaigns. And quite often they're not very precise, they're not very clear, they're a bit vague, they're a bit wishy-washy. And I'm going to give you some context around that today. We're going to look at creating your value proposition. What's the framing of your message? Then start to look at some of the key channels that you might use and how to get the best from some of those. It's obviously, there's a huge range of channels. We're going to focus in on some of them and how you might be able to use them more effectively. And we'll finish up with measuring your results. So, an overview then of the key planning steps. And one of the things I just want to sort of draw your attention to is this model, which is the PRACE model or the RACE model. And it's this sort of set of steps. It's a really good campaign planning mnemonic, campaign planning tool, and we're going to look at that in a little bit more detail. So if you've got your own planning tool, your own planning template, great. I'm sure it works very well for you. If you don't have one, then consider this one as quite a simple, quite a straightforward, quite an easy to use tool. However, let's just take a step back for a moment. This slide and the next slide, if you get lost in this whole process, and I do understand that it's easy to kind of get confused, and you might feel that sort of templates and things are being sort of over regimental in terms of the way you're trying to work. This slide and the next slide really sum up what this is all about. So, 7 basic rules to communications. Identify your target audience. Who is it you're trying to reach? And clarity around that is really important. Create the right message for that target audience. Try to avoid sort of general, generic, sort of those messages that sort of try not to offend anybody but end up not pleasing anybody either. So that sort of right message for the right audience and then getting the message to the audience. And it does come back to those sort of fundamentals of, it's the right message to the right audience at the right time. And those sort of first 3 points really summarize that. So ask for their support. Most people are reactive. Some people are really sort of proactive, they're self-motivated, they're real go-getters, and they're really sort of energized and enthusiastic. They're the sort of people that, go and sort of go parachuting to raise money for charity. But those sorts of people are, they're probably in the minority. And most people need a firm sort of constructive message, and they need you to ask them for their support. So don't be shy in asking for support. It's one of the most challenging areas, particularly in this sector, is how do we ask for their support without looking like we're sort of begging or sort of scraping around, feeling a bit uncomfortable. That assertive, confident ask is really, really important. Make it easy for them to support you. I'm always amazed at people putting barriers in the way of, you get a great message, you get the audience right, you get the message right, you get the delivery right, and then it all just kind of tails off, and there's no kind of clear course of action, and that can be frustrating. Keep them informed post campaign. This is a brilliant opportunity for donor acquisition, but how are you going to build the journey going forward? These are all things that we're going to touch on in today's session. And most of all, maintaining good public relations, protecting your reputation, which is quite challenging in the days of social media, trying to manage that reputation effectively. So, those are sort of seven basic general rules. Let's get more specifically into fundraising communications. Right. So this is where this is where the crunch point comes, I guess. How much do you need to raise? What's your goal for the campaign? And and I understand why sometimes people are sort of a bit reticent on this, but that clarity around what it is you're trying to achieve and how much money you're trying to raise is absolutely critical, because without that, you have no benchmark for moving forward, you have no stretch target, you have nothing aspirational, and it not having that can often make a campaign a bit lackluster, shall we say, a bit kind of like half-hearted. It's about that clarity of what you want to raise, is it? I think particularly within um, sort of environmental issues and also the arts, which was the previous session that we've run as well. We've done the the match funding in the arts as well campaign. I think absolutely critical is this express in human terms and connect. What is the environmental impact in terms of impact on human beings, on society? That's what people connect to. Talking in terms of statistics of, we've lost this much rainforest, we've destroyed habitats, in Africa, all of these elements, they have a stronger connection and a stronger emotional connection and a wider appeal if you turn that into a human connection. So, how have the indigenous people in the Amazon rainforest been affected, for example? How does that affect the livelihoods of those working in tourism in the Amazon? How does this affect human society in terms of people being displaced from their homes, in terms of flooding or environmental damage? That's what gives you the emotional connection. People don't connect in an emotional way to things like statistics in terms of habitat loss and things like that. They connect in terms of the human story. So try to think about the human story connection to the areas that you work in. It makes it easier for people to relate to what it is you're doing because they understand the impact on human beings. How much do you want from me? What are you looking for? And of course, this is where the match funding gives real oomph to what you're doing, because you can say, well, if you gave just £10, we could turn that into 20 and that add on the gift aid. It's a really powerful statement that you can make. Share success. What have you achieved as part of the campaign? Share success. What have you achieved? What do you hope and strive to achieve? And that's really important. Charities are selling, have got to sell success. And the only way, you've got to sell hope for the future. And the solution to selling hope is to sell success. Look at what we've achieved over here. Look at what we've achieved over there. Look at how it's made a difference to this particular problem. And the need to share success is something that you can do in this campaign and sort of future campaigns and communications. Repeat the message. Coming back to the point I just made a moment ago, most people are reactive rather than proactive, and they need little sort of nudges and reminders. And you can start to think in terms of, you've got that window of opportunity for the main campaign, but what can you do pre-campaign? What are you going to do during the campaign? What are you going to do after the campaign? And that need for repetition is there. As people have got busy lives, they might miss the first one, they forget about the message. The repetition is really, really important. Make it personal, make it relevant. again, linking back to the human terms and connections, and the careful targeting. Try to avoid trying to be all things to all people and come up with that effective targeting. Now, there's some really good case studies. I just want to draw your attention to this. I just want to flip over a bit to this. Um, uh, we've got some great case studies on the Big Give website, so do take time to have a look at them. And I've just picked a few of those today just to kind of hone in on some of the key points that I want to make. But do explore that area. And I think the cycle campaign, is a great example of just applying some of those key steps that I was just looking at. So the challenge, £20,000 in online donation. You've got that clarity of how much we want to raise, the clear mapping of our supporters, the clear sort of segmentation and tailoring of the message, preparing your systems, getting your communications channels and systems sort of up to speed, activation of the multiple channels, thinking about the different media that you can use, creating that urgency in real time with things like these sort of short windows for match funding. You've got that natural sense of urgency kind of built into the program, and then mobilizing the community. Who are the people around that can support you? And we're going to tap into some of these different ideas as we go through some of the points that we want to make today. So this is the race planning approach. As I say, if you've got your own sort of supporter journey, donor journey model, and that works very well for you, fantastic. I'm not suggesting that you switch. But what I would suggest is that you take a look at this website. You can get a free membership to Smart Insights. It's it's not specifically for the not-for-profit sector, but it has got not-for-profit and charitable resources within it. So it's a more sort of a general sort of tools and toolkits for people working in digital marketing and digital communications. But this is just if you want to know more about the race growth system, where it comes from, the planning and the framework and so on, and how to use it, and you want to develop on a little bit on from today, that's a really good one to look at. But what I would say is you can join, there's a free membership, basic free membership you can sign up to. Each week you'll get they're usually really useful tips. They're really interesting things that you get. It's not just sort of, a load of sort of sales pitch through your email. They've got some really, really good practical emails that they send out each week. So take a look at that. And it's just this basic customer journey model. We need to reach people, we need to get them to act and interact, we convert them, we keep them engaged. And the reason it goes round in a sort of loop is because once we've got people sort of into our universe, then we need to reach them again, get them to act. So it becomes this continuum. And it's got these various different elements. So you can see it takes you through the process of, what is it we want to achieve, marketplace analysis, in particular things like audience analysis, objective setting, what do we want to achieve, how can we achieve our goals. And then when we get down to the tactical elements, some of which we're going to look at today, we tend to sort of combine the act and convert elements together. Now, I don't want you to look on this as a sort of a definitive list of the tools and channels to use for reach, act, convert, and engage. But think about your own tools. What have you got in your communications toolkit that's suitable for reaching audiences? What have you got, and what do you need to think about in terms of action and convert? And what do you need to do in terms of keeping audiences engaged? If all you do is run intermittent campaigns and you don't maintain the momentum in between those campaigns, you become known as the charities that only ever gets in touch when they want money. And what the digital toolkit enables you to do, this fantastic array of tools that we've got at our disposal now, is yeah, we can have the big budget spectaculars, the big campaigns like, like the Earth Raise campaign, the match funding campaigns, but it's that drip, 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 drip in between that keeps people warm, keeps people interested, gives you the chance to share success. And that's what builds relationships. That's what builds sustainable support and loyalty to a cause and, what all of the great work that you do. And that's why you need to think about what you've got at your disposal for reaching act and convert plus engage. Now, really, really important is to think about the sort of stakeholder network. And on the left, you've just got a very generic stakeholder network mapping tool. The organization in the middle, and then separating perhaps into donors, into media, into local businesses, government, local and national, and so on. It depends on what sort of area you're working in, how high level you are, and so on. But just look, when you start to use that tool, this example on the right of stakeholders in the forest, look at how it starts to break down. So there's no right or wrong way to do this, but you build this network. So, they've got professional interests, they've got economic interests, they've got forest users, for example, they've got social neighborhoods and things. And what it does is enable you to build this network of support for what you're doing. And it helps you to generate ideas. Some of the best ideas for fundraising can come from your supporters. If you haven't sort of built those networks, given them those opportunities to send their ideas or share their ideas with you, then you're missing out. And the burden without stakeholder mapping and thinking about who can help us, who can we go to, who can we look to support us, without doing that, you end up being everything has to come from you, which is an enormous pressure. Whereas opening this out, just it can almost feel like a whole range of opportunities is starting to open up for ideas and so on. Now, the really important thing is you can see on the right how this has expanded and starting to expand quite quickly. The thing you need to do is start to break these down by interest in what you do, an interest in your cause, and level of influence, the ability to influence other people. And this is based on Mendelow's matrix. Some of you may well have seen it, but it's just about thinking about, instead of trying to treat all stakeholders the same, because when you look at this, you think, well, we can't possibly meet all of the needs of all of these stakeholder groups. This enables you to do is start to prioritize those. And we focus our efforts where we've got the sort of high level of interest, high level of influence. Those are the ones that we try to manage most thoroughly. And then we've got, dependent on how they're categorized, other opportunities for managing groups. But we've got to look after things like our high value donors. We've got to look after those celebrities that have worked with us. We've got to perhaps look after and maintain the relationships with sort of key players in local government, for example. So it just enables you to focus, and rather than thinking, oh, we've got all of these stakeholders, let's just pick some, it enables you to focus and prioritize, and that really helps with your targeting. So understanding the audiences then. This is about building audience personas. And this is a key part of modern marketing and modern marketing communications, because what we've got is we've moved away from sort of a core team doing all of the sort of communications. And what we've got now is sort of multiple content creators. Some of them could be outsourced, some of them could be third parties, some of them could be agencies, some of them could be activists out in the field, some of it could be some of your key workers, for example, and they're all got the opportunities to create content. And that is fantastic. But the thing they need, the key elements they need to be able to create great content around your campaigns is who is the audience. And what the personas enables you to do is think about some of these key questions and answering. This is like a sort of really basic checklist that you might start to think about. But what we're designed to do is to create this sort of little mini composite persona. It's not a real person. It's sort of a composite of some of the behaviors and so on that make up the target audience, so that anyone can pick that up and look at it. It's usually sort of in one or two pages, can pick it up and go, right, yeah, I understand who the audience is. Right, I need to create a video or whatever you've tasked them with doing, or write some copy or create a post for social media. Without that, your content lacks the necessary focus. So this is a really important part of it. And if you haven't got these, now might be a good time to start to build these. And there's some tools that Media Trust have put together, and we can share these with you after the event. There's a couple of tools, and this is the first one is the persona canvas, and this just gets you thinking about the facts, the relationships, the feelings. Charities sustainable supporter bases is built around emotion. If you think about the way we make decisions, everything we do is part based on an emotional response and an irrational response. So when we look at a charity, we go, oh, there's an injustice there. It's something I want to sort of help solve. I agree that that's a challenge that we should be facing up to, trying to address. That's the sort of emotional side of things. On the rational side of things is, well, how do I know they're going to spend my money wisely? Well, what have they achieved? What are they doing with my money? Those are all the sort of the rational thought processes that we go through. And your supporters' decisions on whether they are going to give you money or not give you money, continue to support you, not continue to support you, is based on that balance of emotional and rational. And within the context of this sector, the emotional tends to get greater leverage, and building that emotional bond with your organization, your brand, if you like, within the sector that you operate in. That's what tends to build the long term. But that doesn't mean you don't need to address those little niggles of, how are they spending the money? What are they actually achieving? Are they actually helping anything here? Those questions will arise. So you need that balance of the emotional and rational elements to build the persona canvas and to help you really understand that target audience. And that's a really useful tool. And then what we end up with, again, there's no kind of set template for this, but what we end up with is often something quite visual. As a minimum, I would say the one on the right is quite a basic one, but they need a name, Molly the Millennial. We need a picture that I can see instantly what Molly the Millennial is like. I can see on the left-hand side what Margaret is like. So you can do quite a basic one, and that the visual elements could just be a relevant picture to indicate instantly who this audience is. But if you can do more visual ones, like on the left, where you've got these nice little graphics and things, they can make it easier to digest what's there. But anyone can put together that example on the right, where you're starting to think about your behaviors, frustrations, motivations, and so on. And then on from that, there's building your supporter journey. So again, we can share this with you. This is mapping the journey, and this starts to think. So again, you can use the race model here, or you can use your own model. your own sort of customer journey, your own supporter journey model. But thinking about what it does is get you to think about what are their needs at the different stage? What are the key touch points? What are the feelings? What are the feelings they may have? What are the feelings you would like them to have? And of course, one of the big criticisms often of charities, and I find myself doing this even though I support, probably at least a dozen charities with sort of regular giving, I sometimes just feel like they're not bothered whether I give or not. And that, you know, you want, how are you going to create positive feelings at key touch points? And I think, a lot of that can come down to your understanding of that audience and the way you apply and use some of the data available to you. I think part of the challenge is in terms of data analysis, and we're all kind of drowning in data a little bit, is the data analysis often begins and finishes with the descriptive analysis. What happened? We might do a post-campaign review and look at what happened. And that's good. It's interesting. It's useful. And it usually is where we share results in the form of dashboards and so on. But think about sort of advancing on from this. If that's you stuck in the descriptive analysis zone, start to move forward into the why. Why did the campaign do better than the same one we did last year? For example, understanding the why something happened is an important part of data analysis. Then, as we build confidence in that, we can start to think about predictive. What would happen if, for example, instead of starting our campaign 2 weeks before the window in April, what happens if, what might happen if we started it 4 weeks before? For example, what could we do? What might happen? And then starting to sort of predict, taking insight and think as you build your sort of testing knowledge, well, we'll try testing a little bit earlier next year or this year, this campaign, and thinking about, starting to predict how things like timing can make a difference. So, there's so much at play here, and timing is one of the most challenging elements to try and get right. How far in advance should we start talking about this? How often within the campaign should we keep sort of prompting people, reminding people, updating people? And it's only through sort of building up that historical evidence of sort of testing and trialing different things, are you able to sort of really delve into that analysis element. So, in terms of defining your goals, then setting these realistic financial and non-financial objectives. I always think, and again, as I said earlier, this is where I think a lot of organizations of all different sizes struggle. Don't think, big organizations find this easy. I don't think anyone finds it easy. You've probably got, and I hope as a minimum, you'll have clarity around what level of income you're trying to achieve. And that's great. If you haven't got that, try to get that in place. There's some good stuff on Charity Digital around sort of goal setting strategies and so on. So do take a look at Charity Digital as well. However, creating dialogues. The reality is that some people might engage with your campaign, but they're not ready to commit financially yet. But building that dialogue, building those opportunities to start communicating, building the relationship, you should be looking at this as an opportunity to start building your sphere, your network, for example. So building and creating those dialogues, those interactions. Thinking about how you can serve, how can you add value? Now, one of the ways you can add value, and this is the brilliant thing about these match funding opportunities, is that added value is enormous. Look, if you give £10, that becomes 20. You give 20, that becomes 40. So, that value added is quite easy in the context here, but there's other ways you can add value. Top tips that you can undertake to make a difference to your local environment. If how to ensure that get a composter for your garden, for example, and top tips of how to sort of compost your sort of fruit and veg cuttings and things like that. So, think about ways that you can use content to add value and demonstrate added value, possibly ways you can save time or money, and creating that excitement, creating that sizzle. So try to get a blend of what you want to achieve. Clarity around the financial objectives and goals, but also clarity in terms of what else. This is an opportunity to grow our supporter base or grow the number of people interested in what we do, for example. So some areas just to consider again, have a look at GoFundMe. There's some quite good stuff. That's where I've taken these from. So raising brand awareness, again, great opportunity with a campaign like this to raise brand awareness. Acquiring new regular donors, acquiring new one-off donors, increasing the average regular giving amount, increasing average one-time donation amounts, growing the number of donations received via a channel, perhaps increasing your email conversion rates. So if you use email to promote the campaign to your existing supporters, what's your conversion rate like? So those are just some areas to consider. Now, creating the value proposition, and really thinking about what is it, how do we frame the message? And this is where, again, I would just urge you to sort of consider the human elements here. Yes, you're looking at environmental areas but what's the connection to human beings and the framing of this? And it's interesting how the impact of things like global warming and climate change is something that we're all seeing evidence of that. And we can lean into that. We can see it with our own eyes. It's no longer something abstract that might happen in the future. We can all kind of see it, and we perhaps need to be reminded how that's starting to affect our daily lives, because that again can be a lever to action. So, what is your value proposition? What's the framing of your message? That focusing in on a specific problem. Too much of what we see potentially is too general, it's too abstract, it feels distant, it's hard to comprehend. The focus is really important. Focus on a specific problem. What's the issue and what's the impact? And that's why a lot of environmental organizations, they create a sort of Save the Bee campaign or Save the Tiger campaign. It's because it gives focus. It enables us to move away from sort of general sort of environmental damage to something that's specific, something that I can take, I can understand. And that's why the sort of campaigns focused around things like bees, for example, certain big cats, polar bears, they capture the public imagination and they enable us to have focus. What are your unique solutions? There's a lot of players in this space. What's your unique take on this? What separates you from other players? Those tangible results, that's what wins the day in terms of helping to convert, but also to retain your supporters. What is the difference that you are making? And selling that, using that, and not being sort of frightened of sharing success, and connect with the values. How do your audience values? And again, this comes back to the persona and the development of personas. How do we shape our agenda around the things that matter to you? So here's some value proposition examples: empowering homeless individuals to gain suitable employment through tailored skills training and support. Um, it- the strength of these is in the which means that. Just look at the last one: supporting children in poverty with educational opportunities to break the cycle of disadvantage. Always think, if you take nothing away, nothing else away from today, think about the which means that in your message. The middle one is brilliant. Yeah, we work in medical research to find a cure for cancer, but the reason we do that is to give families more precious time together. The which means that is a vital part, because what you're doing is turning features into deliverable benefits, the difference that you are making. So always think, when you're developing your propositions in the context of this or on other things that you're doing, what is the which means that? It's really important. This helps you to structure your message. What's going to get the attention of the audience we're trying to connect with? What's going to hold their interest? And this is where you can use that combination of turning features into benefits, leading with benefits, the difference that you can make. That's a critical part. Try to lead with benefits and then underpin them with the features. We've delivered this, and we were able to do that because we've got networks on the ground in the country and so on. Um, the desire, make them want to act. That's the emotional bit. That's the emotional connection, and it's so important. And being clear about what you want me to do. So, just in terms of structuring your content, those attention-grabbing headlines, you have got, the Earth Raise campaign and match funding ticks quite a few of these boxes, which is great. Ultra specific and a sense of urgency. This is the campaign. This is the window of opportunity. This is the unique proposition. Of match. I know it's not unique, but this idea of sort of match funding doesn't come along every day. It's quite specific. So you think about how those attention grabbing headlines can try to leverage some of these points. Just be careful. There's some really good tools out there. I'm just going to quickly flip across to these actually, because there's some really good tools out here, like Headline Analyzer. If this is an area you struggle with, to sort of create attention grabbing headlines, attention grabbing subject lines for your emails, you might find some of these tools useful. They've all got free versions, and it's like a sort of an AI second opinion that can just help you to sort of get better at this. And if nothing else, spend a bit more time thinking about it. Because the reality is, if the headline doesn't grab me, it doesn't matter how good the rest of it is, I'm probably not going to bother. And that's the sort of stark reality of it. Think about the visuals. Canva has got, if you're not familiar with Canva, they've got a free option for not-for-profits, and really worth, just look at how you can sort of jazz up sort of a basic image and turn it into these nice little overlays of text onto images and stylizations and things. Just really nice. And it moves us away from having to sort of learn things like Photoshop, for example. So if you haven't explored that, think about how you're going to create sort of attention grab. If it's a click through, it needs to look like a button, which means it's quite often sort of white text, perhaps on a dark blue, dark orange background, and so on. So if we want me to click on something, create buttons. Use of color, things like that can really start to make a difference. Holding their interest, bite-sized chunks, shorter paragraphs, headings, subheadings. If it's starting to look like pages from a novel, it's going to look heavy going. quotes, separate them out, stylize them. Something like you see on the right-hand side there, you can do that quite easily with Canva, for example. Look at how much more impact that gives by just that little bit of styling there. Creating the desire, conversational. One of my sort of big criticisms is that quite often on sort of in this sector, there's some great work that goes on social media. There's some brilliant sort of posts and things that go on social media. They've got a lovely conversational style. They've got human warmth to them. And then when you click through to the website, it's all quite sort of stark. You know, we started our charity in 1946, and since then we've had people want results. They want, first and foremost, to know about the impact of what you're doing. All of the sort of features stuff, when you started, how many volunteers you've got, use that to support the evidence, to build the credibility, but lead with that human element, the conversational element. It doesn't need to be starchy and stuffy and impenetrable. And quite often that's what we see on websites. They're quite sort of, one size fits all. And yet, other things that we do around campaigns have got a nice sort of conversational style to them and are really accessible and so on. Just try to get sort of more of that because that's what switches people on, really. Getting the attention, good design, high visibility, clear benefit. What will this achieve? Actionable text, words like discover, learn more. Try to avoid things like click here for more information, visit our website for more information. Try to add more substance to it. Short and sort of that sense of urgency. And of course, you've got that element to this that you can utilize. Just a few tips on choosing the right channels. Time is running away with us a little bit. Think about the balance. You've got at your disposal a range of owned, paid, and earned channels. This is the poem mnemonic. Um, Try to use a range of these. Don't rely just on earned. Earned has got to be earned. Make sure your owned house is in order. Make sure that you've got great landing pages around the campaign on your website, for example. Perhaps support, use some of the many paid opportunities out there. Google Ads, I'll come to in just a moment because you can get a Google grant. Might be time to, there might be enough time to get that in place for this campaign, actually. But look at this. This is great. Again, this comes from the cycle. Targeted communication. What are the communication channels we're going to use? Clarity of those, really important. The before, during, and after. Teaser, main campaign, post campaign. We can use this. Don't just concentrate everything into the week of the campaign. What can you do before to warm people up to it? What can you do after to build on what you've achieved? And again, if you only look at one case study on the resources bank on the Big Give website, the cycle is a great one to look at if you want a sort of a role model in terms of planning. And I always say, don't acquire a supporter, don't acquire a donor unless you've worked out what you're going to do next with them. And this is really important. This is really thinking about the donor journey, the supporter journey. What are you going to do after the campaign to keep the audience engaged? So next time you want to ask them for money, they're receptive to it. So the landing page, really, really important. Make it obvious. What do you want me to do? Try to avoid jargon. A clear, concise, uniform, consistent call to action is what works. Um, Make it easy to read. Conversational, use headings, standout text, bolds, underlines. But most of all, make it jargon free. Write with warmth and use bullets and subheadings to sort of break things up again. Shouldn't look like pages from a book. Use images to tell your story. Use infographics to show, that 90 pence in the pound goes to the cause. These are things that just help to overcome those little niggles that I might have about whether I should support you. If you do need to use forms, things like data capture forms, for example, so, for those who are not ready to donate yet, maybe they can join your e-newsletter. Always have a fallback. And some organizations need to use these for sort of pledges of donations. Other times it's just to encourage people to join an e-newsletter, for example, but only ask for what you need and keep them easy to use. Test and update, really important. Um, it's about that evolution of learning. And that's where, testing and trialing, having little test elements and trial elements within each campaign is what can enable you to progress. Getting your emails read, um, just remember this. Who's it from? What's it about? How's it personalized? Anything of interest, anything to act on. You can see here we've got a nice example of how that's been constructed into a very effective email. What I particularly like about this is examples of match funding. 20 becomes 40, 40 becomes 80. 25% extra gift aid, means that, 20 becomes 25. This sort of thing. Bring it to life with examples. Um, and that's, the power of match funding. And focus on that subject line. That's the critical bit, because if you don't get past that, invest more in subject lines, less in terms of the proportion of your time, more effort in subject lines, and use those tools. Like, here's some other ones as well. Use like Monster Insights, Headline Analyzer. They can all help you. And the great thing about some of these is you can provide the context. Is this a headline for, a subject line for an email? Is that headline a sort of to describe a video, for example? Creating that buzz on social media. Try to use, with imagery and video, authenticity is what matters. Always focus on authenticity. That is the key in my view. Um, so a few sort of social media fundraising tips. I need to wrap up in time for questions, but choose only the ones, there's go with the ones that work for you. Um, don't forget to ask, but get balance. So this is an opportunity to ask for donations, but as you build your content and your interactions, try to get a good balance between sharing mission and achievements, educating informants, and asking for donations. So the sort of 70-20-10 rule is worth really thinking about. You don't want to be that charity with a reputation that they only ever talk to us when they want money. Um, Use your supporters. Go live if you've got live events. Think about sort of streaming, how you can maximize those. Keep track of your success. Use tools like Canva. That Canva's got scheduling tools. It's got tracking tools so that you can monitor the performance of your social media posts, for example. And do not forget to thank people for what they've done for you. Again, it's about reward and recognition, and that's what nurtures longevity in the relationship. Um, Google Grants, if you're not familiar with it, just have a look. Just Google Grants, you'll find it. This is pay-per-click advertising on Google, like the sort of the sponsored posts at the top of the page. You can use this for sort of day in, day out, but I think it really comes into its own of supporting these sort of big budget campaigns. But there's some great examples there. And provided you are non-political and non-denominational, you'll qualify. So no politics and no specific religious connotation or enhancement or proposition, but provided, I mean, Christian Aid can use it, provided they're not overtly suggesting we all need to be following a Christian religion, for example. So non-denominational and non-political, really, really good. Just very, very quickly, and I'll leave you to sort of have a look at this sort of in your own time, but measuring your results. So um, financial measures, return on investment, net income, gross income, those are some of the main ones there. Engagements, acquisition, retention rates, second gift rate giving, average donation size, impact and awareness, traffic to your website, inquiries, partnerships engagement, for example, amplification rates, conversion pathways, again, thinking about that journey to conversion and beyond. So that brings to the end of the of my formal presentation. I hope there's some useful tips and advice that you can potentially take away from that. But we have about 5 minutes for questions. So probably best if I come off of screen share and Sahil can direct some of your questions to me.
Thanks, Nick. Really appreciate spending time with us. That was a really great webinar. I will have a quick call out for questions. I think only one question has been asked, but
Oh,
I've
okay.
answered it. But yeah, quick call out. We do have a couple of minutes for questions. So if you do
Mm.
want to ask Nick or myself anything, please do so. Please put your questions in the Q&A box. And just a reminder, we do have a webinar today with two charities from last year. So they're giving case studies on their campaigns from last year. And we have our
Brilliant.
Ask webinar on Thursday. Um, so I'm going to give it 1 or 2 more minutes for anyone to post a question. Um, but I will also just like to remind everyone to accept your offer if you've not already done that, to make sure you have, yeah, you are taking part in the campaign. You will have to accept your offer. We do have one question. Um, yeah, here's a question. Do charities usually email the supporter list in advance of the campaign? I was just doing so at the start. I will start this off and then hand over to Nick. We do advise sort of warming up donors ahead of the campaign, just saying, "Oh, we're taking part in the Earth Race campaign, which is taking place on these days. It's your opportunity to have your donation match funded." I think coming in cold, suddenly saying, "Oh, you can have your donation double," will catch donors off guard, and some may not be prepared for it. So we definitely advise warming up donors, saying at least a couple of weeks out from the campaign, just letting them know that you're taking part. This is how you donate, obviously with a link to your campaign page and the offer of match funding. So we wouldn't advise just only don't asking them on the launch day, but I'd also hand over to Nick to answer that.
Yeah, I think this is such an interesting question, and I think if you look at some of those case studies on the Big Give website, some organisations are starting to talk about this 4 to 6 weeks in advance, and I think going with what Sahil's just said, I do think if you're not starting to warm your existing supporters up to this a couple of weeks in advance, you're potentially you're not giving it the potential amplification. And it's a good opportunity to get more from your existing supporters, but it's also about giving those existing supporters the chance and opportunity to share across their networks as well and go, oh, this is a great charity I support. And, I know we've kind of talked about it. You're not a supporter yet, but look, there's a great opportunity now with this sort of double your donation to perhaps make it. So it's a good opportunity to get your supporters on board, and even if they don't perhaps want to make an additional donation, giving them the tools to share about the campaign as well to their networks, their people they're friends with on Facebook and so on. And I think if you're just landing on day one and going, oh, by the way, it's match funding week. I think it almost looks like it's a bit kind of last minute. And I think you've got a good opportunity to warm people up and sort of amplify the impact of the campaign. Yeah.
Snake. We do have a question from Milani. She's asking, how does Big Give envision managing the new soft-in approach? So there is sort of new guidance around opt-ins.
Yeah.
Lani, I would ask if you can email us that question and then we can get back to you with a full answer. I don't have the exact details in front of me, but if you can email us, we can then get back to you with a comprehensive answer for you.
Mm, mm.
Um, Eight and just seeing correct. Yep, I can't see any questions. It is 1 o'clock. Oh
Okay.
yes, there's one question I would I'll wrap up with which I'll let Nick answer. But so Chris has asked if you could focus limited energy on a few channels, what would they be?
Okay. Yeah, I'll try and answer this sort of in sort of under a minute. But if you've got an existing supporter base, email, I think, is absolutely critical. Email is such an important tool. One of the best retention and development tools for existing supporters. Um, Landing page of your website for the campaign, even if the rest of your website is not as good as you'd perhaps like it to be, make sure you've got a good squeeze page, a good landing page that talks about the campaign, how to donate, and so on. So that landing page of the website is critical. And go with your favorite social media channel. Facebook has the biggest usership, active usership of all of the platforms. In the absence of, going into the pros and cons of each social media channel, that is the juggernaut, whether you like it or not. And it tends to be where older supporters are more active, and they tend to be the ones with often more money to donate. So email, one social media channel, website, landing page. I'd focus on those three.
Definitely underline that. And I think, yeah, that is great advice. Definitely focus on the email. Um, but I just want to thank Nick again for joining us and sharing all of this wonderful advice with us. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today and sitting in on this webinar. A reminder, we have that webinar tomorrow at 12 p.m. with charities from last year giving case study on their experiences. But with that in mind, I hope everyone has a lovely rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.